On June 23rd, 2025, it was announced that Sarah J. Maas signed a multi-year worldwide deal with IMG licensing of her characters for various romantasy book series. According to Hollywood Reporter, who broke the story, this includes apparel, beauty, lifestyle, home decor, wine and spirits, food and beverage, toys and games, collectibles, cosplays, and immersive fan experiences. Sarah J. Maas never gets the flowers she deserves, and as Samantha Chang, vice president at IMG Licensing, put it, quote, "Sarah and her fans have created a cultural phenomenon that has redefined fantasy fiction." Hi guys, my name is Claire Holiday. I am a fantasy author aspiring traditional publishing. I am not in my usual location today. I'm at my local public library. So we'll see how this goes. I feel kind of crazy. I am also a big Sarah J. Maas defender. So a trend that I have seen for a long time are content creators making all sorts of essay videos about how crazy Sarah J. Maas books are, picking out cringy lines or talking about how weird it is that these super elaborate, sometimes convoluted plots intersect or hinge on kind of wild sex scenes, or that every single character, good or bad, is stunningly drop dead, sexy, and gorgeous. And all that is true. But what I wanted to talk about, and what I feel like she never gets any credit for, A, she's wildly successful doing these things, and B, she single-handedly created a new fantasy genre, romantasy. Did you ever hear about the term romantasy growing up, or even really heard the term 5 years ago? Now it's actually used as a label in bookstores, and that was because of Sarah J. Maas. So I wanted to go over some stats, some statistics, just so we can have an idea of how popular and revolutionary Sarah J. Maas is. So Brandon Sanderson, beloved author, super popular, has sold 20 million copies of his various book series worldwide. Now let's look at George R. R. Martin, who has sold 90 million worldwide, but experienced a 60 million spike after Game of Thrones was aired. And most of his, well, that includes all of his series, most of this is on the backs of The Song of Ice and Fire. Now, Sarah J. Maas, who does not have any sort of TV show or movie or anything like that, has sold 75 million copies of her various series worldwide. That is crazy. That is not far off from George R. R. Martin's and Game of Thrones. That's nuts. And just in case you guys were wondering, Harry Potter sold 60 million. She doesn't have necessarily the critical acclaim of someone like a Brandon Sanderson, nor does she have a TV show or movie deal like George R. R. Martin. But if you go to Target, to Barnes & Noble, to an airport bookstore, her series, it's not just a few books, they line the shelves. They have completely taken over enormous sections. If you go to Barnes & Noble, she's usually posted in various different sections throughout the store because she's just that popular. So why is she so revolutionary? What did she do? She didn't coin the term romantasy, but she built it. So for a long time, readerships had to choose between fantasy books that had a romantic subplot, or they had to read straight romance, which didn't necessarily have like the deep world building or even just fantasy backdrop. Paranormal romance kind of started to take off, obviously because of Twilight in the mid-2000s, as well as the young adult category. And what young adult did, again, thanks to Twilight, is it showed that you could have huge success with readers putting romance at the center of the plot and still having some fantastical elements to it. But the issue that I think many readers, and I remember feeling this way, is that you might like young adult, you might like YA, like that it's fast paced, that it tends to be female centric, that there can be more interesting like plot stuff going on, but there is an age component. It's young adult. It's still considered children's fiction. And therefore the characters are younger, and therefore sometimes the plot feels juvenile and the romance can feel juvenile. You can only go so far with things. The main dude, the main love interest is often like 17. The mid 2000s, like the 20 teens, you could see that with the popularity of Game of Thrones, that people, that adults, they wanted more complex plotting and they wanted more violence, more graphic sex scenes. Young adult was a genre that was mostly read and sustained by adult women. So you have the rise of young adults, but you also have the rise of Game of Thrones. And here comes Sarah J. Maas, who was willing to fill in that gap. Now, I know many people will be like, oh, Sarah J. Maas has not the most complex or rotund world building or magic system in the world. And that is true, at least not compared to maybe someone like a Brandon Sanderson or a grim, dark sort of Joe Abercrombie. I agree. There was more time spent in the book talking about world building and magic systems than there is on sex scenes. But the important thing is that there are sex scenes, and the characters skew older, especially once you get to the more like fae or fantasy characters. I mean, you know, the trope of them being hundreds of years old, but they're supposed to look like adults. They're not supposed to look like teenagers. It's a romance, and the romance is so important, and it is integral to the plot, and it is integral to the growth of the characters and how the characters interact with the world and with their powers, but that the world building is still important. And that is something that I think does separate Sarah J. Maas and why she's so popular in other romantasy authors, is because these romantasy authors maybe are jumping on a bandwagon, a lucrative bandwagon, but a bandwagon. They're not giving as much credence to the importance of the world building and the magic systems that Sarah J. Maas is. And again, some people might laugh at that, but I would only recommend that you read her series in its entirety. Throne of Glass is an enormous series, and most of that is dedicated to magic systems and world buildings and political machinations. It might not seem as sophisticated as some other series, but they're readable and digestible, and they're there still. There's something for people to grab onto. It feels more complex and compelling than other romantasy books that really are using those as just wall hangings, as decor. It's like that actually is a central component of these Sarah J. Maas books. As much as people want to stick their nose up and act like it's just the romance and it's just the sex, it's like, well, if it was just that, then all these other romantasy books that are copying it without putting in the effort of the world building would be doing just as successful as her. They would also be selling 70 million copies worldwide, but they're not, because they're not putting in that sort of effort. This is my pro Sarah J. Maas rant of why I think she is successful as she is, why she deserves to be as successful as she is, and why I think she's difficult to copy, although many are trying, and why she deserves a lot of flowers, because she did pretty much single-handedly create a new genre of fiction. Now romantasy is a usable shorthand for work that basically is like Sarah J. Maas. Like, who's doing Sarah J. Maas but isn't Sarah J. Maas? That's what romantasy is. And not many are doing it as well. You can fight me on that in the comments below. I would love to see your guys' opinions on Sarah J. Maas, her work, romantasy, and the rise of it and all of that. If you have any thoughtful, interesting critiques of Sarah J. Maas, definitely leave that down in the comments before. I don't think her work is perfect. I don't by any stretch of the imagination, but I very much think she deserves the success that she is having, and she's doing very particular things to earn that success, putting out so many books, putting out so many series, willing to take chances. I think adding in sex scenes in a young adult novel was her taking a chance, and it has paid off wildly. I think her kind of being known as this romantasy author, but willing to focus on and making her worlds even more and more complicated and robust, is a risk that she is, you know, seeing the fruits of. That's how I feel about her. Let me know your opinions down in the comment below, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.